Hello, I'm David Eames and welcome to the On Your Mind podcast. I'm joined as usual by Owen and Mikey, and today we're going to be talking about grief. Owen, what do you think about grief?
It's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's one of them. It's unfortunately it's a natural thing that happens, isn't it? And I think it's strange because you will face it throughout your life, and you will, unfortunately, organically, you will always treat it differently. Because as you're younger, like when you lose grandparents or pets or whatever it is, it's one of those weird things that kind of you don't realise how much it's affecting you because it's not something that people necessarily talk about. And I know recently, I don't know if it's like before lockdown, I had quite a big, like, traumatic experience. One of my best friends was murdered. One of my best friends from school. So I hadn't seen her for a long time, but we were really close. So when we did bump into each other, it was always like we'd never not seen each other. And she was murdered in quite a dramatic way. And then my cousin, who's one of my closest friends, his mum died, who's also was really close to me. And then her partner died. And it was this whole, like, trying to be strong for everything else and everyone else. But actually, I still don't think I've grieved properly for any of it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I think oftentimes you need to shed a tear and have that really, really, really crying moment, you know, that like snot bubbles, and just to get it out and to try and flush it a little bit, because it almost feels like a bit of a plug when that's not been released and it's still kind of sat there waiting. Do you know what I mean? It makes you overly emotional with other things. Yeah. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. When my dad died, I was 25 when my dad died, and I went and made all the arrangements, registering the death, going to the undertakers, going to see the accountant and solicitor. Did it all on my own, came home to my mum and my then teenage sister. And my mum got sort of sympathetic with me. She said, "Oh, David." And I felt a tear coming, and I just immediately pulled it back. I thought, no, I've got to be strong for my family. Yeah. Mm. And I didn't even cry at the funeral. Yeah. But months later, I was watching some movie. I don't even know what the movie was. It had Bruce Dern in it. He used the phrase, "I'm not the daddy. I don't want to be the daddy." Yeah. And it just burst out of me, and I was inconsolable for hours afterwards. Yeah. It just gets locked up sometimes.
I think it's incredible how the body knows what you need. It's only your conscience that gets in the way of it. And that is normally a conscience is built off something else, either macho bullshit or what you feel is expected of you. Mm. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I know there's a lot about boys crying and male suicide and all this other thing at the moment. It's quite a key topic. But it is one of those things that it's not ever been that someone sat you down and goes, "Hey, if you feel bad, you can have a little cry, And I never really realised. It was only when I was a bit older that I hurt myself and I did the pain dance instead of cried. As a kid, like you'd kneel on Lego or something, straight to mum, crying or whatever. And then I realised when I was like 17, 18, I was like, I haven't cried in ages. And it was it was a weird revelation to myself. And it wasn't like it was a problem, but it was something that I'd acknowledged within. And it is a strange thing that you do pull those tears back. Mm-hmm. Like, even when Stacey will watch an advert on TV, and it could be the most insane thing, and I look over and she's just wiping her tears away. I'm like, "Are you all right? Is this Kleenex had really got you that much?" Like, "No, I'm fine. I think it's all right to let go. Like, it's quite sweet." Do you know what I mean? Because it shows that you're human.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think, Mikey?
I was just processing that and listening in, and I just had a thought or wondered of the other side of where you said I should just let it all out, or I want to let it all out, or need to. What about people that go through grief but then want to force themselves, if they don't feel like they need to cry or want to cry, but because everyone's told them it's okay to cry or you should cry, and they're expecting to, and then they don't feel it? What advice would you have for them people that may feel guilt surrounding that then?
Well, it's because it's whatever feels necessary at the time. So when my mother died, that she'd had dementia for a while, and I didn't grieve when she died because I kind of done the grieving earlier because we'd been losing her over a period of time. Yeah. And the main overwhelming feeling I had when she died was relief. Mm. Yeah. And,
but you'd been through it before. I know well you'd been through it before, and I think it's a stranger grief when they're still there because it's like a guilt-ridden grief. Does that make sense? Because you can't make the most of what's still there because it's what you're losing. Do you know what I mean? And they're still there.
I mean, the guilt I had was that she wanted to die and I couldn't do that for her.
Yeah.
There are weird feelings. The thing is, there are never any wrong feelings. This is an absolute key thing, not just with grief, but with almost anything, because you don't choose your feelings. They're coming from a part of the brain that you don't have conscious control over, but you do choose what you do next. And I'd like to talk for a minute really about my sort of technical approach to grief. People talk about 7 stages of grief, which I think is mistaken and often misapplied. They were originally designed for people who'd been given news of a terminal disease. The approach that I like to use is having 4 tasks to accomplish to deal with grief. And these happen in parallel with one another. So those 4 tasks are accepting the reality of what's happened, feeling all of the emotions that are associated with it. And it's not just sadness. It can be guilt, it can be shame, it can be anger. People can get really angry with someone they've lost or the reasons they've lost them for. It's about making the accommodations, the changes to your life to deal with that person or that thing no longer being there. And then so kind of wrapping it up is the idea of an emotional relocation of what's been lost. So it's moving to that point where it's the fond memories in the past, not the pain in the present.
Okay.
So the process of grieving, if you like, is there are 2 states. The state 1, something has happened which is really hard and I don't want it to be true. And state 2 is I accept what's happened and I'm okay with that now. I'm moving on. And it's not a smooth progress from 1 to 2. It's a jagged thing.
Yeah.
So initially you're all in stage 1. And just occasionally you feel a little bit better. But as time goes by, you spend more and more time in stage 2. But then you can be pulled right back into that pain again. And that can happen even years later.
Yeah.
Just, it's just something will remind you of that pain, but you actually spend more time thinking about the fond memories that you had. So there's no stages, there's no order in which to do things. It's about finding your best way through it. But I guess the only thing I would suggest to people is allow yourself whatever it is you need to feel. So I guess in answer to what you're saying, Mikey, is it's whatever's right for the individual.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about when, like Mikey was saying then, when someone says you need to grieve? I've never reacted well to that personally.
No.
When someone say you need to do this or to do that, and I often think it's got to be organic. It will always feel more beneficial if it's organic, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think it's obviously I take a lot of advice from you, and we have a lot of conversations, and it could be from me struggling with having 2 kids under the age of 15 and or work or whatever it is, and obviously me and David will often chat and be like, look, just plan it out. Just, and I think oftentimes the tools to be able to guide me that way are more important than someone saying, here's a step-by-step, first grief, then do this.
Yeah.
Because it, like you say, it's different for every single person, isn't it?
Yeah, the first thing I say with any new client when I'm working with them is that I have no idea what's going to work for them.
Yeah.
Because I don't. Because if I did, I'd be trying to hammer them into my mould to make them conform to my way of doing things.
Like
I haven't
there's
got
a
clue.
rule book here. You've got to follow this and you'll be fine again.
All I know is that the process of talking about stuff that bothers you with someone who doesn't judge you works.
Yeah, that's true.
It's kind of magic. And it's easy to not judge people when you actually engage with who they really are.
Yeah.
And you start to understand why people are the way they are.
Because I do think there's pressure on people in so many avenues of their lives to feel like they've got to feel a certain way. So even to me and Chrissy, when we were having Ella, our baby, we kept getting told by parents and family members and friends, oh, you're going to feel like this and this is going to feel like this and it's going to be the most incredible feeling ever. And then if you put all this pressure on that, I just told everyone stop. Like, I want to feel however we feel at the time, and then let the process happen organically. Because in truth, when it first happened, it was just a shock, really, and I didn't know how to place myself. And the same with Chrissy. She just felt exhausted. And yeah, we felt excited by it all, but we didn't feel this instant love that we were told. And that's just a truth. But I think a lot of women go through like postnatal depression from feeling guilt and shame that they didn't feel the way they were told to feel straight after.
But it's all normal. It's all normal. I could give you David a gift and I could give you a gift and you could react completely differently. It doesn't necessarily mean that either one's wrong.
No.
In my opinion. And that's why, as much as I can get frustrated with things, I've always said to like the kids and to my partner, just be straight with me. Just be 1,000% straight with me, because you might feel like you're going to upset me or say something wrong, but I would rather know, because then that way because for example, I know this isn't grief. It was a bit of grief for me because I've been with her forever. So buying presents for your partner when you've been together a long time gets more difficult. And I was buying a Pandora Charms, you know, the little things on the bracelet. And I thought I was onto a winner. So I kept buying them. And she kept saying, these are amazing. They're the best thing ever. Thanks. Got to the point where she couldn't lift her wrist off the table. And she was like, look, after the second one, I'd had enough.
Yeah.
And I was like, why didn't you tell? Didn't want to upset you. I'm like, it's upset me more that I've spent 1,500 quid on the rest of it that you didn't want, and I could have got you something else.
Yeah.
But it's the honesty. And it's, I don't know, especially with grief, something that I find particularly helpful is always remembering them or speaking about them. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's often with me and Stacey or whoever, like when we're taking our current 3 dogs for a walk, I'll say, Harley would have loved this, and I can visualize him. I miss him every day. I think about him every day, and I'm glad I've got that memory of him. Yeah. But it's still really difficult. But I will constantly, even when I'm telling the kids, because they can remember him a bit, but not as much as what they need to, or what would be normal now. And it's kind of difficult. Do you know what I mean? But I think the more that you vocalise it, the better it feels.
Even when a loss is very fresh, you know, very often people can feel inhibited. They've got a friend that's lost someone or something. Because I'm going to be clear that grief isn't just about people. It can be about jobs. It can be about illness. It could be changes in life, age. There's many different things we can grieve about. So we're talking in general terms about loss. But people think, I don't want to talk to them about that because I don't want to upset them. But talk to them about it. Yeah. Because at that time when you've lost someone close to you, that's the time you really want to talk about them the most.
What would be some good advice to people helping somebody deal with a loss then and grieving? Because I remember, this is a little story, but my mum, I had a 3-legged dog called Jake, and I loved him to absolute bits, and he looked after me because school for me was horrendous and I was just a bullying factory. I hated it to bits. But Jake, when I got home, was just there. So I had this companion that I never had. And then the day that he had to be put down, and it was the worst day ever, my mum's reaction was, let's just send him to school. And I was an absolute mess. The one thing it did do was stop all the bullying, because I remember this bully walked behind me, he spat on me and said, "Oi, fat boy." And I just turned around, and I used to take it all the time, but it just all bubbled over, and I didn't stop. I started swinging at the teachers, and it all was coming out, and I was kicking him, and he ended up in hospital.
Everything for a reason.
It was really bad, really bad. But I think probably not sending me to school on that day and giving me a bit of space and just time would have been very helpful. Even though the bullying did stop though, so something happened. But I was just wondering, appropriate procedures in helping people. I know it must be so different, but
well, I think it isn't different, because you treat everyone the same in as much as allow them to be who they are. Yeah, that's whatever that is.
Lovely. Yeah.
You know, so if someone is dissolving in tears, let them. Because often, you know, people want to rush to, let me give you a hug, let me give you a tissue, let's stop this. It's because they feel uncomfortable with witnessing that.
Yeah.
Whereas one of the strongest things I can do for my clients is just to let them cry.
Yeah.
Just to sit quietly and allow it to happen, because it's doing them good.
Yeah.
What about somebody, let's say, who's numb and doesn't know what they want or what to do? Do you just sit beside them in that moment and let them process it?
Well, just talk about it. It's going to happen in its own time. Again, that's, you know, that task of accepting the reality of what's happened. The bigger the loss, the harder it is to absorb that.
Yeah.
I've worked with people who've lost children, and people think people are surprised at how matter of fact they can be immediately after receiving the news, because you can't process that immediately, you can't absorb it, and actually that's an example of a wound which never heals.
Yeah.
The most you can do is kind of learn to live with it. Often you find that parents who've lost children will become crusading in some way because they're trying to find some meaning from what's happened.
Yeah.
Different ways of dealing with it. So some of the times the dealing with the grief becomes almost a lifelong process.
Yeah. I mean, I know of a couple that I worked with closely when I was in my previous job, that their daughter was diagnosed with a terminal illness. And we did everything we could, to try and... It was almost like a make-a-wish. And we did a load of stuff, and it was fantastic. And we got really close to the family. And me and her got on really well. She was really cheeky, so it was brilliant. I could teach her swear words and all sorts. But I know that since she's passed, it's even harder, because as much as she was suffering during the time, I think there's certain things that will trigger people. Like if you're a husband that's lost a wife, you can be a widower, or what's the word? So you're
A widow.
A widow, yeah. So no, isn't it different for a husband and a wife?
Yeah, he's a widower.
She's a widow, and so you've got all these different names. But then for a parent to lose a child, there isn't a name for that, and it kind of feels like you're being cheated a little bit. Does that make sense? Because, like you say, they do go on this crusade to sort of try and make a difference for someone else, because it wasn't like it was expected. It came out of the blue, and then all of a sudden it affected their life massively.
Yeah,
and it's interesting to see how they deal, because obviously we're still friends, and some of the stuff they've done, I take my hat off. I probably couldn't do it even now. And then other stuff that they're struggling with, and it's
I mean, it's defined in different ways. So an ordinary loss, if there is such a thing, you call it an object loss. But the loss of a child is a project loss, because it's the lost future.
Yes.
Typically, it seems to me that mothers really struggle with this idea of not being there. They worry about their own death and not being there to raise their children.
Yeah.
And how much more so to lose that future, that imagined what the future would be, even if they have other children afterwards.
Yeah.
It's often, what would that other child have been doing now?
Yeah.
And there can be a guilt associated. The feelings can be enormously complicated. The key is that none of the feelings are wrong.
Yeah.
And there is no right set of feelings to have, because everybody feels things differently.
Do you ever find that when you'll say to someone, if there are 4 key stages, do you ever find that, because some people...
Not stages, tasks.
Tasks, sorry. Obviously we've worked with people in the past which are go-getters, and they want to tick off the boxes faster than anyone else. Do you ever find that those type of people will try and rush through this? So it says, I need to cry. Okay, I'll have my quick cry. And then, okay, that's that done. Next. But then ultimately they end up breaking down because they never even passed the first part. Does that make sense?
Well, because it's that difficulty with showing vulnerability.
Okay.
Toxic masculinity can play a part in this. I've got to be strong for my family. Yeah. And, when I lost my father, I didn't cry at the time. You reel forward quite a few years, when we lost our last dog, the nurse in the vets looked strangely at me because I howled like a banshee.
Yeah.
But by that time, I'd learnt that it was a good thing to express that thing.
Yeah.
But the previous me wasn't in the wrong. It's just different.
Yeah.
It's just different. And it's about just helping people. It sounds such a cliche talking about being there. But if you take it literally, that's sometimes all you can do is just be there. Be alongside someone, to not let them be alone. Because when we suffered a severe loss, it's almost like a huge fear. There's this howling void of anxiety that thing that we loved, that person that we loved, is gone, and we're never going to see them again. And it can feel like this is a void that's just going to suck us into it.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying as well.
Yeah. Do you think it's because, especially for me, my first loss was grandparents. Mm-hmm. And I think I must have been, say, 13, 14. We lost my great-grandma just before, but obviously, when someone's nearly 100, you're kind of like, okay, we didn't see him as much, but it was horrible. But when my grandma Woodward died, I was devastated. Mm-hmm. But it then kind of shook my actual reality because I never thought it would happen. I didn't think that was normal.
Yeah.
So when that started to happen, it was, I then started questioning everything. And that's when it kind of, I don't know, that's when it scared me more than anything. This, not fear of death, because I know we spoke about death, but that it's not all sunshine, lollipops and rainbows. There's a little bit of like dark shit in there.
There's
as
a lot
well.
of sort of existential questions coming your way in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think those of us who have been fortunate to have reasonably secure upbringings, as a child, you see the world as being fairly constant. That, you know, Christmas is going to be the same people are going to be there.
Yeah.
It's weird, isn't it, when you start getting older and things.
You suddenly realise that change is the only constant.
Yeah, you go to more funerals than you go to weddings or stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I've known many more people who are now dead than those that I know who are living. And that's the nature of hanging around for a while.
Yeah. But 2 minutes ago, you were 40 and you never thought you'd been in that position. And then, do you know what I mean? It's so quick because you blink and you miss it.
It's only quick in retrospect.
Yeah, true.
This is the whole thing. It takes as long to live through.
Yeah.
As it always did.
And just one thing to mention there is toxic masculinity. Do you find the sexes, there's commonalities in different sexes in terms of grief and how we grieve?
There's maybe more of a tendency one way than the other. So, you know, you can have men who are very expressive. You can have women who struggle with that. But I mean, it's the society that we've grown up in. Perhaps particularly those of an older generation, grew up in a society of not being expressive about these. I think 2 world wars had a part to play in this.
Yeah.
The Victorians used to do death in a big way. They had black jewellery, you know, with pieces of locks of hair of the people that had been lost, or even bracelets made from the hair of someone that had been lost. They had, you know, big elaborate funerals, and they employ mourners and things like that. And I think in 2 world wars, because so many families lost so much, it became a thing to don't remind everyone else, because everyone's lost something. You know, don't make a show of your own.
Be polite.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is typically British, I suppose, and fitting for the time.
Yeah.
Because I think when you speak to people of that generation that had fathers or whoever that came back from the war, because it wasn't that far away from us, well, especially when we were growing up. And I think that is a lot more tough Brit. Do you know what I mean? And I think that a lot was piled onto the men that came back or the men that suffered. Because you look now at the PTSD and all the rest of it and things that are clearly problematic that no one even acknowledged back in the day. It's like, right, well, you're back. You should feel lucky because you survived, so get back to work. And it's like, holy shit, I might imagine dealing with all that.
Yeah.
And then you've got a kid that wants to play football or whatever with you. You haven't got the brain space to even get yourself to work, let alone be doing funny voices in a children's story. So it's difficult to sort of comprehend of where we've come, because it is quite a fast arc, in my opinion, to be able to now acknowledge that actually we probably should talk about this a bit more. Do you know what I mean? It's better that it has come out.
Yeah. And the thing is that complex emotions are different for everyone, because they are learned. So some people may not be appearing to express their emotions because they can't express them to themselves. Maybe they know they feel something, but maybe they don't. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. Just be there alongside someone, allow them to be themselves.
I was just going to say, this reminded me, have you guys watched The Idiot Abroad?
Yeah.
And have you seen The Moaning of Life?
Yeah.
He did one on death. And when you spoke of societal and the conditioning element of it, he went to so many different regions and tribes and countries. And there's lots and lots and lots of places on the earth and different parts of Africa, I think he was, where they'd have a death, but it turned to a massive celebration.
Yeah.
And they'd be partying and the families would get together and it'd be this colourful, everyone had to be in the most colour possible and marching down the street, and it just looked really exciting, and they saw death as a celebration. Whereas when we do it, it is this very glum, get black on, everyone. And do you think then there is a part to play in how we've decided to condition it in our society?
Well, I've been to funerals where it has been as a celebration.
Oh, so they do exist
celebration
in.
of a life, yeah.
Well, I prefer that. I've never been to one of those.
Yeah, often, in people perhaps of a more religious bent, then there may be a more positive outlook about it all.
Yeah.
But the thing is, even then, remember, those who have been closest have got to move on, and it takes time. There's going to be this thing of there's a 9-day wonder until the funeral's done, and then people can feel really lost and forgotten. And maybe that's when they need the care more than that in that period immediately after the death, because maybe that's the time when they're working on that task of acknowledging the reality of it,
I suppose
making the adjustments to it.
The reason we struggle so much in grieving, though, is because, and that's the previous episode we've done on death, we don't acknowledge it enough, we don't talk about it enough, and we haven't meta-programmed it as, oh, is it a celebration now? Because death happens, we celebrate that life, but we sort of just cram it into the end of somebody's life where we start thinking about it, and then it hits us a lot harder.
Yeah, well, you almost shy away because it's been so deeply conditioned that it's not something like the same as sex and death. The people in England don't really talk about it, but it's like the same as at the end. Like, it's so traditional from years and years and years ago that everyone wears black. It's very sombre. It's very this. It's very that. It's very typically British. Which, when you start seeing things on TV now or radio adverts where it's like, you don't want a funeral that's going to cost you 25 grand. You can just be buried and grown as a tree. And there's all these new things that are coming out that, really, why shouldn't we break the mould? Why shouldn't we have changed it? Like, Auntie Nikki she's at St Michael's Woods, and it's basically like just this wooded area, and you choose a plot, and then we went and released the ashes there, and it's wonderful, and she would love it, and you can take the dogs, and it's exactly what she would have wanted. But she didn't want any of the other shit as well. She didn't need a pallbearer. She didn't need the hearse. She didn't want any of that because it's just a waste of time and money. And you kind of think, all right, so we don't have to do it. It's all right. But it was one thing that really struck me when I was talking to Paul, actually, and he said the thing that what hits you the most when you're grieving is when you forget yourself or you're in your own world. And it was when Stacey's granddad had died, and he said his grandma will notice when she gets out 2 cups to make a cup of tea instead of 1.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's going to send her sideways. And I kind of put myself in my position in our world, mine and Stacey's world, and it just broke me in half.
Yeah.
To imagine myself in that world, because I know how it would feel, and it was absolutely so just like someone pulled the rug. It was heartbreaking.
It's just that moment you think, oh, I'm just going to tell them. Oh no, I can't.
Yes.
About 20 years ago, my friend Bill, he died of mesothelioma. He was 70 at the time. We knew he was dying, and he and I did quite a lot together in the last year of his life. We'd go to art galleries together and off to country houses and just
stuff.
Yeah, I was trying to prove to him that everything he ever learnt was wrong, in my inimicable way. But we had really quality time together.
Yeah.
But after he was gone, for months afterwards, I kept thinking I was seeing him. Not a ghost. It's just you'd see someone that might have some aspect of their gait or the way they dressed which reminded me of him. And I wanted to see him.
Yeah.
And he wasn't there. And so that was, again, a sharp pang of loss.
Yeah. Almost cruel.
Yeah. But these things, there's the whole thing, I guess, we're coming to what cures grief in the end is time. And it takes as long as it takes. And there's that whole jagged process of moving from stage 1 to stage 2. As I say, it just you can suddenly be taken back thinking, well, I've been really set back. No, it's just part of the process. So accepting that it takes time is, again, it's another way of dealing with it.
Would you say that you have to get over it? Or is it okay to, like, holding on to someone and their memory, anytime you remember them, is that grief or is that just a happy memory? Like, because, when people say you have to, time will heal and you'll get over it. But what if you kind of don't need to get over it? You just need to accept.
It's maybe moving past it, maybe is a better description of it. And so I talk about that. What the task that wraps it up in the end is the emotional relocation of what's been lost. So you can think about someone and talk about them, and then a smile might come to your lips and you're remembering the happy times together.
Yeah.
And it's
Okay.
not always that sharpness of pain.
Yeah.
So getting over them is not forgetting at all. It's remembering. But it's remembering what was there, what you valued, not what's been lost.
It's being sort of comfortable in their memories as well, isn't it? I suppose if you're thinking back to them and it's really hurting you, or you're trying to block it out, you've probably not grieved enough in that moment.
Would you say that you can relapse on a task? Would you say that, for example, if you feel like you've got to a certain point a few years later and it's the middle of the summer and you're quite happy within your life and everything's good and you can think of them and remember them fondly, but then you get to Christmas and it's a bit dark night and it's a bit quiet and you know you're not going to see them that year, does grief creep back in, or is it just more?
There's no right answer.
That's what I mean. It's kind of, and I'm not trying to say to people you need to hit this stage, but it is. It's all right to feel that way. It's all right. It's not like you've failed. If you feel like in June you're really nailing it, and then in December you're struggling, because personally for me, remembering my dog or remembering a lost family member is really important, and I love telling stories. And the more that I can pull in from the majority of these people that we've lost, it just keeps them alive, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But it can hurt at the same time. So I think rather than me not ever telling that story again and sort of dipping into the grief that might affect me after I've told the story is more important than the story's shared. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, and it changes with time. So my wife and I never had children. It wasn't planned that way. It just didn't work out that way. We didn't go down the route of wanting to find out what was wrong. We just were accepting of what had happened. But increasingly, as time went by, I have a little bit of grief for the children that we never had.
Yeah.
Because it'd be quite nice to have grandchildren running around now and things like that.
Yeah, of course.
And so there are no right ways. That's why I'm so opposed to that idea of stages of grief. Oh, you failed in some way. You've not gone through that.
Yeah.
It's like I say so often in other contexts. Whatever works. Sometimes there's almost a sweetness to pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, we've talked before about how grief and pain are the price of love. Well, feeling that pain of the loss of someone is just a measure of how much you cared about them.
That's lovely, that is. Yeah, that's even got me emotional then.
Yeah, it's true though, isn't it? And I think it makes you feel human, because I think, especially like when one of my granddads died, it was a case that we were going to the hospital every other day, and you did become numb. And I'll never forget being a kid and my mum saying when her grandma died, going to the hospital with my grandparents, her parents, she was wishing that she'd die. And as a kid, it was hard for me to sort of wrap my head around that. Like, I thought the world of my grandparents. I was thinking, you wanted her to die. But obviously I wasn't aware of what pain she was in and what she'd been suffering with and what she'd been through. But then I found myself in the same position. And I felt like I'd grieved. I felt like I'd got through it. And then I got numb to the fact that we were doing this because it was kind of ticking a box the whole time. And then when I lost them, all I wanted was them back. Do you know what I mean? But that pain made me feel like I wasn't just a bad person for wishing this on them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it really kind of leveled me to the point again to it almost justified, like, no, it's all right. This is just normal.
Yeah. In one of the early Star Trek movies, there's a character there that says to Captain Kirk, "Let me take away your pain." And Kirk says, "I don't want to lose my pain. It makes me who I am."
Yeah.
And there's a real truth in that.
Yeah.
Because it does that pain enriches our lives. That there's a maturity that comes through it in a way. There's an acceptance of those existential givens that's how life is. And until we've really suffered, we don't really know what life is, I think.
Is there any telling signs where you yourself or somebody around you that you love isn't processing or going through grief healthily in a good way?
It's a really hard question to answer.
Yeah.
Again, it's about how close you are able to be with someone. When someone is looking at ending their life very often, typically they look very relaxed because they've made a choice which is working for them.
Yeah.
So often people think, I got no idea that was what was going to happen. Sometimes it can be a spur-of-the-moment decision.
Yeah.
And that spur of the moment can come about because the pain feels unbearable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
the only thing we can help to do is to be there to help someone to bear that pain.
And what about the person experiencing in it themselves? So any signs inside of myself where I'm maybe recognising that I'm not going through grief in a healthy manner?
Well, again, I think it's counterproductive there because you end up being self-critical.
Okay, you did.
Self-acceptance,
Yeah.
that whole loving others is about accepting them. Well, if you're going to love yourself, you need to accept and forgive yourself. But it's maybe just about having a moment of reflection, of thinking, have I felt everything? What do I actually feel about this?
Do you perhaps mean if you saw someone like drinking heavily or spiralling, or maybe not treating themselves quite, like, if you see someone just really falling into a hole?
There'd be some telling signs. I think what was going in my head was a friend I did a podcast with, actually, and she's got a foundation out now. And she went on holiday, and her friend committed suicide on holiday, and she discovered the body. And she's a really young person, only 22. And then she went into pilot mode from that. And as you said earlier, she ended up getting a charity foundation and everything, and just went and built all these amazing things. But eventually she ended up with PTSD because she'd not managed to process this.
Yeah.
So I just wondered, any telling signs of somebody, a parent, seeing that and her in pilot mode, checking in.
Seems like she's got it all under control, dealing with it really well, but actually she's...
And it probably is really hard to say, but same with herself. Like, what would she be able to recognise? I'm not acting my usual self here. I'm not being my who I am.
It's about trying to be open with people, isn't it?
Yeah. And
It's
checking
super
in.
difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
Being able to, maybe check in with someone without appearing to be judgmental is hard.
Yeah.
People get through it in their own way.
Yeah.
Sometimes people do take their own life, and that's their right to do that. Sometimes people feel it's the only control they've got over life.
Yeah.
Friedrich Nietzsche said, here's a quote for Mikey.
I do love a quote.
Sometimes the only thing that gets me through a dark night is the thought of suicide.
Yeah.
Because it's that, hey, I can end it. I can end the pain.
Yeah. There's something keeping you in.
And who are we to say, well, no, you should be able to deal with this pain?
Yeah.
Maybe someone can, maybe someone can't, but maybe we can be alongside them and let them know that they're not alone in the midst of that pain.
Yeah. I think that the main thing, like you said, is you've got to talk.
Yeah.
You've got to talk, and you've got to listen. And as much as you can have someone's back. Yeah, I just I can't speak highly enough of it. That just sometimes just being able to just offload or just vent. And often when we talk, it's not a case that I'll say something and I get this is actually right, or that's right, or this is what you should do. There doesn't need to be a lot of advice that comes back from it, but just being able to go and just get it out. It can just, I don't know. Some people write down. I know Stacey, she writes her stuff down.
Yeah.
And she says that really helps. I'm not a big fan of writing. I could draw a picture. But
Yeah. I mean, a way of getting rid of angry feelings, you can write it down. It doesn't have to be some great poetic effort. Just writing shit
Yeah.
might help.
Yeah.
It's like there are no right answers. There are no wrong answers. It's whatever gets you through.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think we've covered this today.
Yeah, good.
Probably we will revisit again in the future.
I wouldn't be surprised.
But thanks very much. Until next time. Bye-bye.